Hello and welcome to episode, what are we on? 34 of the Monday Night Review. A bit late, as you can probably hear. I'm not very well. I've got a horrible cold. I haven't got the official cold, but I have got a cold and a cough, and it's just slowed me down somewhat. And I had a really hard time deciding what to do for this week. I hope you're all well. Thank you so much to everyone who has bought me a coffee or supported me on Patreon. If you want to do either of those things, I'd absolutely love it. They will be linked below in the show notes, and you can find all the links on the blog, which is themondaynightrevue.blogspot.com. Again, that will be linked below. And in the future, anyone who buys me a coffee will be getting a personal big thank you at the beginning of the next episode. So, yeah, full of cold, but not feeling too terrible, just the annoying cough. And I can't count how many times I've had to say to people, it's not a COVID cough, it's just a cough. I think I've got the equivalent of freshers flu that my kids have brought me back from school. So I'm really sorry if I sound a bit rough today. You're just going to have to suck it up and deal with it, or wait till next week when hopefully I will be better. But today we are going to be talking about the Mary Celeste. I've already said it wrong. Today we're going to be talking about the Mary Celeste, which is sometimes wrongly called the Mary Celeste, because the majority of what you know about this is in fact fiction. There's been so many stories made up, so many different accounts, and it's quite a lot of them are wrong. So today we're going to talk about what actually happened. I'm relying a lot on Wikipedia for this because literally once you veer off verified stuff, I know Wikipedia is fallible, but you get into the realms of unbelievable paranormal stuff. Not necessarily unbelievable in general, but in terms of the facts of this case, it all gets a bit silly quite quickly. So the thing about the Mary Celeste, which I think really adds to the whole history of it, is that it seems fairly doomed from the beginning. From the moment she's built, it doesn't go well. So she's not called the Mary Celeste, she's called Amazon. And she's built in Spencer's Island, which is on Nova Scotia, and launched under British registration as Amazon in 1861. So as we've established in earlier episodes, I'm not a boaty person. So when I talk about boaty stuff, I'm going to either say the wrong thing or I'm going to explain what it is for those fellow non-boaty people. And if you are a boaty Monday Night Review listener, ahoy there. So she's a brigantine. Now, I have never known what this is. It's a big boat, 2 masts and rigged with square sails. She's carvel built, which means the planks are side by side and not overlapping. And she's about 99 feet, 30 metres long, 25.5 feet, 7.8 metres broad, and 11.7 feet deep. So in my head, I've always imagined it as one of these huge, really deep ships, but she's not. 11 feet's not that deep. So she has about 198 gross tonnage. Make of that what you will. She's owned by a local consortium of 9 people, headed by Joshua Dewis, and she's built at his shipyard, so he's one of the owners. And one of the other co-owners, Robert McClellan, is the ship's first captain. For her maiden voyage, which is in June 1861, Amazon sailed to 5 islands, which is just off Nova Scotia, and home to the biggest waves in the world. You know, anyone who's on social media, there's if you're on TikTok, every now and again I get taken to Boat Talk, and there'll be just films of people on boats in huge waves, and my husband finds it really exciting, and I think it just looks horrendous, and I think it looks horrendous in modern boats. The thought of taking a boat like the Mary Celeste, or the Amazon as she was known then, to the place with the world's biggest waves is just a big no for me already. So she goes there to take on cargo of timber for a passage across the Atlantic to London. So after supervising the ship's loading, Captain McClellan falls ill his condition gets worse. And so the Amazon returns to Spencer Island and he dies on the 19th of June. It's not a great start, and he's not an old man. As far as I can find out, he didn't have any prior health conditions. Obviously, I don't think you captain a ship that you have a vested interest in, as in you have money involved in, to go from Nova Scotia to London if you are not tippity top. So this isn't a great start. So John Nutting Parker takes over as captain and resumes the voyage to London. But the problems are not over. During the voyage, Amazon collides with fishing equipment in the Narrows off Eastport in Maine, and after leaving London on the return journey, ran into and sank a brig. So a brig is a smaller version of a brigantine. See? In the English Channel. Not ideal. This is trip 1. So, not the best start. But Parker remains in command for 2 years, during which the Amazon worked mainly in the West Indies, and it seems to be going well. There's nothing really reported bad happening. She crossed the Atlantic to France in November 1861, and in Marseille she's painted, they think by Honor de Pellegrin, a well-known maritime artist of the Marseille school. So you can actually see this picture. I will try and find it to put it on our social media. In 1863, Parker is succeeded by William Thompson. So we should give a shout out to Parker, who was a captain and survived. So William Thompson takes over command in 1867. And during this time, everything again seems fine. She goes about her business, going from West Indies, England, around the Mediterranean, no mishaps. That is until October 1867 at Cape Breton Island, which again is near Nova Scotia. Amazon's driven ashore in a storm and is so badly damaged that her owners abandon her as a wreck. It's just going to cost too much for them to fix her. And on October the 15th, she's bought as derelict by Alexander McBean of Nova Scotia. And within a month, McBean has sold the wreck to a local businessman who, in November 1868, sells it to Richard W. Haynes, who's an American mariner from New York. So Haynes pays about $1,750 US, which in today's money is about 17.5 thousand US. And then he spends $8,825 restoring it, which is about $100,000 in today's money. He makes himself captain, as you would if you just spent that much money on it. And in December 1868, he registers her with the Collector of Customs in New York as an American vessel under the new name Mary Celeste. He's captain for nearly a year before the ship's seized by his creditors in October 1869. Throughout this story, I keep thinking, has anyone seen the film Overboard with Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell? I love that film. And in it, Goldie Hawn's husband, I cannot remember the name of the actor, but he's hilarious. Her husband goes a bit mad at the end, and it's all set on his boat. And I just keep thinking about this. I don't know why. So he's captain for a year before it's seized by creditors. And in October 1869, it's sold to a consortium headed by James H. Winchester. He's an important person to remember. And he retains his share, even though the consortium changes over the next couple of years. People come and go. He retains his share. And there's no record of the Mary Celeste's trading activities during this period. There may have been at some point, but we can't find them now. And in early 1872, the ship has another $10,000, which is about $172,000 in today's money, spent on a major refit. They made her considerably bigger. She's now 103 feet long, 25 feet wide, and 16 feet deep, which has increased her tonnage to about 282. So a second deck's added. An inspector's report refers to extensions of the poop deck. I never knew what a poop deck was. It's the bit above the cabin. You probably knew that. I didn't know that. Loads of timbers replaced. So on the 29th of October 1872, the Mary Celeste is owned by a consortium broken down into 12 shares. So there's Winchester, he owns 6 shares. There's 2 minor investors who have 1 share each. And then the new captain, who's Benjamin Spooner Briggs, has the 4 remaining shares. So Winchester is still the majority shareholder, and then captain. So Benjamin Briggs is born in Massachusetts on the 24th of April 1835. So he's in his 30s. He's one of 5 sons. His father is Sea Captain Nathan Briggs, and 4 of the 5 sons ended up going to sea. 2 of them become captains. And they are very observant Christians. Benjamin reads the Bible regularly. He goes to prayer meetings. And in 1862, he marries his cousin, Sarah Elizabeth Cobb, and they go sailing for their honeymoon. And they have 2 children. So they have Arthur, who's born in 1865, and then Sophia is born in October 1870. And by 1870, Briggs has achieved a really high standing within his profession. He was really well thought of. He knew his job, but he was considering retiring from going to sea and going into business with his brother Oliver, who also wanted to retire from life at sea. Being away for a long time, obviously it has a certain amount of danger to it. And I guess when you've got 2 small children, I mean, I nag my husband for going away with work. Not quite the same as going away for years at sea. So they were going to go into business together, but these plans changed and they each invest their savings in a share of a ship. So Oliver invests in the Julia A. Hulcock and Benjamin invests in the Mary Celeste. So in October 1872, Benjamin takes command of the Mary Celeste for her first voyage, following her extensive New York refit. And the plan is to take a delivery of denatured alcohol from New York to Genoa in Italy. I think weirdly, arranged for his wife and 2-year-old daughter to go with him. His school-aged son stays with his mother-in-law, Benjamin's mother-in-law, the child's grandmother. Now, I love Joe very much, but I would draw the line at going on a boat with him in the 1870s with a 2-year-old. No, thank you. I mean, I wouldn't want to go with him anyway. I wouldn't go on a boat with him for months with a 2-year-old now. No. Briggs is very experienced. He chooses his crew carefully. I think it's always really important to remember that he's not just an employed captain. He has got almost, he's got a very large share in this boat. So he chooses very carefully. And his first mate is Albert G. Richardson, who was married to a niece of Winchester's. He'd sailed under Briggs before. He was a trusted man. The second mate was Andrew Gilling, who's a 25-year-old New Yorker of Danish extract. And the steward is newly married Edward William Head, who came with a personal recommendation from Winchester. And then the 4 general seamen were all Germans from the Frisian Islands. There's Arian Martins, Gottlieb Gutschall, and brothers Volkert and Bos Lorentzen. And the testimonial has had them down as peaceable and first-class sailors. And it's not a huge crew, and they probably know each other. It seems that the first, second mate and the steward all know each other or know of each other. And then you've got the 4 general seamen who are probably Germans who came to America to sail together. On the 20th, so what I mean is there's not one person who is sort of, I mean, you could say, I guess, the one who we seem to not know much about is the second mate, but there's no one sinister. On the 20th of October 1872, Briggs arrives at Pier 50 on the East River in New York City to supervise the loading of the cargo, which is 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol. Denatured alcohol is ethanol with additives to make it taste vile and make you ill. So alcohol can be used in loads of things, in making loads of things, but obviously if you can drink it, it's harder to travel with and it's more expensive. So they denature it to basically, it means you avoid paying tax on it as a consumable. So it's cheaper to ship and generally much better. So that's really important to remember. It's denatured alcohol. So Briggs's wife and daughter join him a week later. And on the morning of Tuesday, the 5th of November, Mary Celeste leaves Pier 50 with Briggs, his wife and daughter, and the 7 crew members. And they move to New York Harbour, and the weather seems uncertain. So Briggs decides that he's going to wait for better conditions. It's basically, it's like they're lining up at the end of the runway. They're just waiting until the right conditions happen so that they can go from New York to Genoa. So the ship's anchored just off Staten Island, and the weather eases 2 days later. So the Mary Celeste leaves harbour and enters the Atlantic Ocean. While the Mary Celeste is prepared to sail, the Canadian brigantine Dei Gratia is nearby in Hoboken, New Jersey, awaiting cargo of petroleum destined for Genoa, but they're going via Gibraltar. And their captain is David Morehouse, and their first mate is Oliver DeVoe, and they're both Nova Scotians, both really experienced and respected seamen. And because Briggs and Morehouse share common interests, some writers have them as besties or that they knew each other. And they may have done, if only casually. They're from the same place, doing the same thing, similar age, similar interests. They probably did know each other or know of each other. But there's no evidence to suggest that, as some accounts have it, that they were eating dinner together the night before the Mary Celeste sailed. Really unlikely. You can't just nip over from one to the other. You're loading your cargo. You've got crew to supervise. You know you're going to leave. You're not sort of having a slapping dinner party the night before you go anywhere. The De Gratia is departing for Gibraltar on November the 15th, and they're following the same general route as the Mary Celeste, but they're 8 days later leaving. And it's really worth noting that the second boat, the Dei Gratia, is a much slower boat than the Mary Celeste. So they're 8 days behind and much slower. So the De Gratia's reached midway between the Azores and the coast of Portugal at about 1 p.m. on Wednesday, the 4th of December, 1872. And Captain Morehouse comes on deck when his helmsman reports that there's a vessel about 6 miles away that's heading unsteadily towards them. The ship's it's got an erratic movement. Her sails look odd, and Morehouse suspects that something's not right. So he waits till they get closer. He signals. He can't see anyone on deck. No signals are being responded to. So he sends DeVoe and his second mate, John Wright, in the ship's boat to investigate. So they get close. They establish that the boat's the Mary Celeste because they see the name on her stern, and they climb aboard and they find the ship completely deserted. The sails are partly set. Quite a lot of the sails are still furled, and the ones that are unfurled are in poor condition. Some are missing altogether, and some of the rigging's damaged. The ropes are hanging loosely over the sides, and although the main hatch is secure, the 2 hatches at either end of the boat are open, and their covers are beside them on deck. The ship's single lifeboat is missing, which is referred to as the yawl. And while the housing for the ship's compass has shifted and its glass cover's broken, that's the only damage they can really see. There's about 3.5 feet of water in the hold, which, although is a lot, it's not necessarily an alarming or unusual amount for the ship of the size of the Mary Celeste. They do find a makeshift sounding rod abandoned on the deck. Now, a sounding rod is a device used for measuring the amount of water in the hold. I don't know what they mean by a makeshift one. I would assume that a ship like that would have its own sounding rod, so I can't really find out what that means, but they just find it lying on the deck. So they find the ship's daily log in the mate's cabin, and the final entry is dated 8 o'clock in the morning on the 25th of November, it's 9 days earlier. It records this Mary Celeste's position as nearly 400 nautical miles, which is 740 kilometres, from the point of where the Dei Gratia has found her. Devoe says that the cabin interiors were wet and untidy from water that had come in through the doorways and skylights, but otherwise everything was in reasonable order. He finds personal items scattered around Briggs's cabin, including a sheathed sword under his bed, but most of the ship's papers are missing and the captain's navigational instruments are missing. So galley equipment, galley is where the kitchen is neatly stowed away. There's no food prepared or under preparation, which is unlike some of the later stories which have people arriving on the boat and the meal is all set out beautifully ready to be eaten. It's all clean, it's all tidy, it's all tidied away, but they are ample provisions. There's about 6 months worth of provisions in the stores on the boat. It doesn't look like anything's missing from there, and there's no obvious signs of fire. There's no sign of violence. Basically, the evidence indicates an ordinary departure from the ship by means of the missing lifeboat. So Devoe and Wright return to their boat to report these findings to Morehouse, and they're about 600 nautical miles away from Gibraltar, so they decide to bring the derelict Mary Celeste in to Gibraltar. This is worth their while. Under maritime law, a salver, who's someone who salvages a vessel, could accept a substantial share of the combined value of the rescued vessel and the cargo. So the exact reward depends on the degree of danger inherent in the salvaging. So obviously, though the Mary Celeste she's not sunk, some people take in and raise sunken ships, she's still a really big boat. They're not that close. And she's got... They're going to have to split up who's manning each boat. She's got over 1,000 barrels of cargo. She's just had an extensive refit, so it really is worth the effort for Morehouse. He divides his crew of 8 between the 2 vessels, so Devoe and 2 experienced seamen go to the Mary Celeste, while he and 4 others remain on the Gratia. The weather's relatively calm for most of the way to Gibraltar, but they make really slow progress. They're undercrewed, and the De Gratia reaches Gibraltar on December the 12th, with the Mary Celeste arriving the following morning because she's been a bit stuck in the fog. So she's immediately impounded by the Vice Admiralty so that they can prepare her for salvage hearings. Devoe actually writes to his wife and says, "The ordeal of bringing the ship in was such that I can hardly tell what I'm made of, but I do not care as long as I'm safe. I shall be well paid for the Mary Celeste." So it was obviously a traumatic journey for the men. When a boat sinks or is abandoned or brought in for a salvage hearing is held to establish what happened and to give the reward to the salvors who brought it in. And so the salvage court hearings for the Mary Celeste began in Gibraltar on the 17th of December 1872. They're conducted by Frederick Solly Flood, who's the Attorney General of Gibraltar. And he's described by one historian as a man whose arrogance and pomposity were inversely proportioned to his IQ, and as the sort of man who, once he's made up his mind about something, he can't be shifted. The testimonies of Devoe and Wright, who are the 2 men that found their first on the boat, convince Flood that a crime has been committed. A belief that's then picked up by the New York Shipping and Commercial List on December the 21st, where they say the inference is that there's been foul play somewhere and that alcohol is at the bottom of it. And I've written, "I roll, you can't drink that alcohol, you wallies." So from the very beginning, nonsense is happening. On December the 23rd, Flood orders an examination of the Mary Celeste, and that's carried out by Surveyor of Shipping John Austin with the assistance of a diver who's called Ricardo Portunato. Austin noted cuts on each side of the bow, and he thinks this is caused by a sharp instrument, and he finds possible traces of blood on the captain's sword. What was really interesting in the report is that the emphasis that it doesn't seem to have been struck by bad weather. They find a vial of sewing machine oil upright and in its place, which obviously wouldn't happen if there had been a massive storm. But it could have been righted after abandonment. But also a lot of things in ships are designed to keep them okay during a storm. So it's hard to know. I haven't looked at a ship of this era, so I don't know how much weight to put on that. Portonato's report on the hull concludes that the ship's not been involved in a collision, it's not run underground, nothing weird's gone on underneath it. And a group of Royal Naval captains also go on and have a look, and they agree that the cuts on the bow have been caused deliberately. They also discover some stains on one of the ship's rails that they think might have been blood, and there's a deep mark on one of the rails, possibly caused by an axe. So this just convinces Flood that human wrongdoing's afoot. And on the 22nd of January 1873, he sends reports to the Board of Trade in London with his conclusion that the crew had got at the alcohol, ignoring the fact that it's not possible to have drunk here, and then murdered Briggs and his family and the ship's officers in a drunken frenzy. They'd cut the bows to simulate a collision, and then they flee in the yawl to suffer an unknown fate. 7 of the barrels, there's 1,701 barrels when the ship starts off. 7 of these barrels are empty when the ship is found, which is important to note. But what's interesting is these 7 barrels are made out of red oak, and the other barrels are made out of white oak, and red oak is known to leak more. So Flood sees these empty barrels as proof that the crew have drunk these 7 barrels of undrinkable alcohol that set them into a frenzy. I would say I know from personal experience what happens when you drink. Well, not my personal experience, because I wouldn't be sitting here. You don't get drunk and go in a frenzy if you drink this stuff. You die pretty horrendously. So Flood just thinks that this means that this is what's happened, and he is not going to be swerved from it. He believes that Morehouse and his men are hiding something. He's convinced that the Mary Celeste had been abandoned in a more easterly location, and then the log has been doctored. And he just basically couldn't accept that the Mary Celeste could have drifted so far from her course uncrewed. Remember, she was going from New York to Genoa, and the Dei Gratia is going from New York to Genoa via Gibraltar. So technically, by the stage that she was, they shouldn't have been able to see each other anyway, and is a much slower boat. So James Winchester, the majority shareholder, arrives in Gibraltar on the 15th of January to inquire when the Mary Celeste might be released to deliver her cargo. You've still got these barrels on board. Flood demands a surety of $15,000, which is a huge amount. Winchester doesn't have this money, and so Winchester is now aware that Flood thinks there's something up and he's involved. Something that maybe Winchester deliberately engaged a crew that would kill Briggs and his officers as part of some conspiracy. But to what end? Winchester's not making any money out of this. If Briggs is killed, he'd still have to buy his shares, if that's what it's about. You don't want a boat you've just spent that much money on drifting around at sea in case something bad happens to it. You're still responsible for this cargo. So although it turns out that the Mary Celeste is very heavily overinsured, this isn't a way to get your insurance money. The boat itself is still fine. The cargo is still fine and needs to be delivered. So I really can't work out what his problem is, basically. On the 29th of January, during a series of sharp exchanges with Flood, Winchester testifies to Briggs's high character and insists that he would not have abandoned the ship except in an absolute emergency. He is a really experienced captain and he's lived his entire adult life at sea. He's the son of a seaman. It's just really unusual, especially if you imagine getting your wife and 2-year-old off a big, relatively safe boat onto a small lifeboat. You don't do that willy-nilly. So there's no evidence of bad weather. The boat hasn't run aground. There's nothing that would worry a captain so much that he would abandon his cargo. It's your job, and it's a huge deal to not get to abandon your cargo. So Flood's theories of mutiny and murder then receive a series of setbacks because the scientific analysis of the stains found on the sword and on the rail of the ship show that they're not blood. And then a report commissioned by Horatio Sprague, the American consul in Gibraltar, he gets Captain Schofield of the US Navy to have a look. And Schofield says that the marks on the bow are not man-made. They're just the natural actions of the sea on the ship's timbers. And I want more info on this because she's just been refitted. So I want to know what these marks are like. She's just been refitted, so I just wonder if these are typical on a boat that's just been refitted or a boat that has done more time at sea. We'll never know. So eventually Flood's got no choice. He has to release the Mary Celeste, and that happens on the 25th of February. And 2 weeks later, with a locally raised crew headed by Captain George Blatchford, who should get a clap for taking on quite a scary job. He's from Massachusetts. She leaves Gibraltar for Genoa to deliver her cargo. And then on the 8th of April, they decide the salvage payment, which is £1,700, which is less, it's about a sixth of the total value of the ship's cargo. So although this is about £189,000 in today's money, it's far lower than the general expectation, which should have been twice or even 3 times that amount, given the level of hazard bringing the Mary Celeste in and the amount of cargo that she had on board. So Cochrane, who makes the decision, his final words are very critical of Morehouse. So when they arrived with the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, Morehouse stays behind to be at the disposal of the court, but he sends Devoe on with the Dei Gratia to Genoa with his delivery of petroleum, and this is taken badly. This puts Morehouse and his crew under suspicion because some believe that he should have kept his boat in Gibraltar as well. I mean, think about how cross people get when their Amazon delivery is late. I mean, if you're working for someone and you've got all of this petrol on board, you don't want to be sitting around. So, what happened to the crew of the Mary Celeste? Flood's theories of murder and conspiracy have just no evidence to support them. Although suspicion of foul play lingers, partly because that's what people like. Some people suspect that it was an insurance fraud that Winchester has devised, but Winchester refutes this allegations. They check into it, that nothing comes of it. In 1931, an article in the Quarterly Review suggests that Morehouse lay in wait for the Mary Celeste and then lured Briggs and his crew aboard and killed them there. But we know that the Dei Gratia left 8 days after the Mary Celeste and is a slower ship. So she couldn't have caught the Mary Celeste before she reached Gibraltar. They wouldn't have been going... The Mary Celeste wasn't going to Gibraltar. She was going straight to Genoa. So what is the benefit? There's lots of personal belongings left on board. There's lots of food left on board. No one wants the alcohol. It's not consumable. So what is the benefit of this? To get the salvage money? Well, you don't know how much salvage money you're going to get. You don't know whether it completely depends on the person. You don't know whether you're going to get a fifth, a quarter, a third, nothing. So it's a big risk and a lot of work for an uncertain payout. So some suggest that Briggs and Morehouse are partners in a conspiracy to share salvage proceedings because they were friends before, possibly. But again, the amount of salvage is so uncertain, and Briggs owns 4 shares in his ship. So he is going to make money from the deliveries, from future deliveries, from cargo. You wouldn't take your wife and child on this. You wouldn't leave a son behind. If you were planning to do something dodgy and disappear forever, you don't leave one of your kids behind. Some believe that the Mary Celeste was subject to an attack by Riffian pirates who are very active on the coast of Morocco in the 1870s. But again, the ship's not looted. There's lots of personal belongings and food left on board. There's no sign of the ship being forced to stop. A skilled crew are not just going to stop a boat and let the pirates get on board. The pirates are going to have to make the ship stop. And there's no sign of that. In 1925, historian John Gilbert Lockhart surmised that Briggs slaughtered all on board and then killed himself in a fit of religious mania. But he later spoke to their descendants and apologised and withdrew this theory. It's just ridiculous. You don't slaughter everyone, then clean up completely so there's not a trace of blood or any evidence, and then kill yourself, managing to make it look like everyone's disappeared. So some think that Briggs moved everyone to the lifeboat as a safety measure. So in DeVoe's report, the state of the rigging and ropes shows that the ship's main rope, the halyard, may have been used to attach the lifeboat to the ship, which would then enable the company to return on board when the danger had passed. But, which would explain why the Mary Celeste would have sailed away empty if they'd been parted, if there was a problem. But if you're getting into a lifeboat because you think your boat's about to explode or you think your boat's about to sink, you're not going to tie yourself to it. You want to be far away. So MacDonald Hastings points out that Briggs is an experienced captain and wonders if he would have done this panicked abandonment. There are just so many things that are odd about this story. Briggs knows what he's doing. He takes his navigational tools and papers on the lifeboat, but no food, no personal belongings. So that means they were doing it kind of quickly. So was he scared? And if so, of what? You're not going to survive for long in a small boat at sea without any food, but you're taking your navigational tools and you're an able seaman and there's no evidence of bad weather. So where did the boat go? He should, although it would have taken a very long time, if you're planning on getting out of your brigantine into the lifeboat and there's all but 2 of you are experienced seamen and you have your navigational tools, you would take food and you would have a fair chance of surviving. People have survived a lot worse at sea. Arthur Putnam, who's a New York insurance appraiser and a leading investigator into sea mysteries, said that the lifeboat, the rope that held the lifeboat was cut and not untied, which implies that this was done quickly. Several times in the ship's logs, there's mentions of ominous rumbling and small explosions from the hold. So he thinks that one day there was a more intense explosion and a sailor ventured below deck with a light or a lit cigar, which set off the accumulated fumes, causing an explosion that's violent enough to blow the top covering off the hatch, which had been found in an unusual position, but not to set fire to the boat. So he thinks that in a panicked terror, the captain and his family and crew pile into the lifeboat, cut the rope and set out to sea, abandoning the vessel. But where do they end up? they're experienced sailors with navigational tools in a shipping route. So everyone agrees that something extraordinary and alarming must have happened to cause these experienced men to abandon what is seemingly a sound and seaworthy ship. DeVoe thinks that because he finds this sounding rod on deck, and he is an experienced sailor, so this one for me sort of makes sense. So he thinks that Briggs abandons the ship after a false sounding. So they find that there's a malfunction with one of the pumps. So it could give the impression that the boat was taking on water rapidly. And this would be obviously a really good reason to abandon the ship and to do it quickly, because boats, once they start to sink, they go fast and they will suck you down with them if you're too close. But I don't know, obviously we don't know what the weather was exactly like, but we have stories of people, and obviously it's a different sort of boat, but you have stories of people watching the Titanic sink. Wouldn't you get away and go to a safe distance and watch? Because surely they would have seen she's not sinking. She's still there. She's still fine 8 days later. So another suggestion is that in this area they have been known to have water spouts, so which is literally a spout of water. It's basically a tornado made of water, and a severe water spout before the abandonment could explain the amount of water in the ship and in the cabins. It could explain the state of the sails and the rigging, and it could have affected, there's low pressure generated by a spout before they happen, and so that could have driven water up the pumps, leading the crew to think that the boat has taken on more water than she has and is in danger of sinking. So it would also explain how maybe they had drowned, that the spout had drowned and overwhelmed the lifeboat. Some think it may have been a displaced iceberg or fear of running aground while becalmed, but it's very unlikely that you'd have a iceberg that far south, and there's no mention from other ships on the similar route that there was any sign of an iceberg. And although there's some areas where a ship could become becalmed in that area, if you're on a boat that's becalmed, you're going to have all your sails out. You're not going to have some of your sails furled. You'll be trying to catch any bit of wind there is. And as we know, that's not the case. The displaced hatches, the hatches that are open, suggest that there's some sort of inspection or some kind of airing. A sea quake could have displaced some of the barrels, causing fumes to be released. Some think that in January 1886, a vessel that was carrying alcohol exploded, and some people wonder if that's what happened in the Mary Celeste hold. But there's no sign of explosion. The barrels are empty because it's leaked out. They're not exploded. There's no damage to the cargo apart from these empty bottles. So in 2006, they carry out an experiment that shows an explosion with similar gases that would have been released, where this sort of ball of fire happens, but there's no soot and there's no damage left behind because the air behind this explosion of fumes is cold air, so there's nothing else for to catch fire. So that's one idea of what could happen. But this story is so intriguing, but it's really got out of hand, and it starts quite early on with the press, saying that when DeVoe and Wright get on board, they find a fire in the grate and dinner on the table, and that's just not true. And some places even have interviews with alleged survivors saying what happened. And I think, say what you like about social media can have terrible consequences, but it's really bloody hard to lie when everyone's got a smartphone and everyone's on social media. But this is not the case. In 1913, the Strand magazine publishes an account from a apparent survivor of the Mary Celeste saying that they'd been doing a swimming competition and everyone had been eaten by sharks. And it's just, you don't do a swimming competition if you're trying to get your boat and its cargo from somewhere, and no one survived. That's the whole point. So the Mary Celeste was unpopular. When she returned to New York, she was eventually sold to a businessman who sailed mainly to the West Indies and Indian Ocean routes, regularly losing money. In February 1879, she's reported at the island of St. Helena, where her captain, Edgar Tuthill, has fallen ill and he dies on the island. So he's the third captain to die prematurely, and it just adds to the idea that this ship is cursed. She changes hands a couple more times, and then she's deliberately run aground in an attempt at insurance fraud, which doesn't work, and she sinks, and that's where she remains. Many have tried to find her, but no one has. And it's just such an intriguing story because she's not the only boat found abandoned at sea. She's not the first, she's not the last, but it's really stuck in everyday terminology, in people's minds. The majority of people have heard of the Mary Celeste, but although they think that this gas explosion could be the reason, for me, I just think, of course, if you think the boat's going to explode or the boat's going to sink, you're going to want to get off the boat. But I don't think you get off the boat, you leave, you never look back. I think you get off the boat and you stay within a reasonable distance to see what happens. And you have the navigational tools. Last week I was listening to another podcast about a fisherman who gets caught in a storm and spends 462 days lost at sea. And you think, if a man with no fishing tackle and a broken boat can spend that long stuck at sea, then a crew of 8 really competent sailors with navigational tools should have a chance. But then why not take any food with you? It's a very odd thing, and endlessly intriguing and frustrating because I don't think we're ever going to know what's happened. For those of you with Sky, Smithsonian have done a very good looking documentary on it. There are lots of very bad documentaries on it that will make you go to sleep. I watched them, so you don't have to. But the Smithsonian one looks great. I just couldn't get it, but I watched the trailers and that looks properly interesting. And that's it, the story of the Mary Celeste. I hope that I will be with you next week, sounding less gross, and thank you for staying with me. I always love to hear what you would like us to talk about. So please either send me a message on Instagram or Facebook, which is at The Monday Night Revue, or send me an email, which is themondaynightrevue@gmail.com, remembering that review is REVUE. And I love you if you buy me a coffee or you support me on Patreon. It really makes a huge difference to me and my ability to do this podcast. And until next week, be kind, stay safe, and always check the back seat before you drive.